This is old man yelling at Star Trek, and clearly I'm that old man. Now, before we get started on the series of videos of me complaining about some aspects of Star Trek, it must be made clear that I do have a very deep connection and love with Star Trek. Not all of Star Trek, as you'll discover, or you'd already be aware of because you've seen me over on the Captain's Quadrant having a few key things to say about Star Trek. But this whole series, I'm just going to be 100% honest about my thoughts and feelings and where I think the franchise is going to go, where it made its mistakes. Now, clearly, it's an opinion-based show, so if you don't agree, you can just fuck right off and go watch something else. But I thought the best way to approach this is just be 100% honest. But I can guarantee you, everything I discuss does come from a place of love, comes from a place that I believe Star Trek should be sitting on top of its mantle to be the greatest science fiction show ever created. It once held that mantle, and it held it for a long time. But it's been a while since we've had that. So on tonight's episode, I want to talk about the end of the Kelvin timeline, the biggest news of the week. I've already spoken about it a little bit on social media, but it's the most obvious thing, right? What? None of you seriously thought that we were going to get a fourth film when it's almost 10 fucking years since we've had a last one? Never going to happen. So why didn't we get Star Trek 4? What happened? Everyone seemed to love the crew, me included. I love the first reboot with JJ, and I love Star Trek Beyond. In fact, I consider Star Trek Beyond to be best of the Kelvin timeline franchise. So why didn't we get number 4? Because believe it or not, they didn't make much money. In fact, Star Trek Beyond, my favorite, had a budget of $185 million back in 2016. It managed to gross internationally $383 million. So you may be thinking, well, fuck, it made its money. What's everyone bitching about? Where's my fucking next Star Trek film? It meant it was barely profitable, if profitable at all. In fact, I would say it was probably losing money with that return on investment. So where does that leave things? You've got one of the biggest franchises in the world, rebooted by one of the most popular directives of that period. And we can't deny J.J. Abrams' approach to 2009 Star Trek really gave Star Trek the lightning injection that I think everyone was pretty happy with overall. Of course, there would have been some outliers that had a real problem with the canon and everything else. But I think they did a great fucking job. Like, they really did. But the problem is they just didn't make the money. They just didn't do it. So Paramount, why were they, if it was profitable in Beyond, especially with Beyond, don't you think they would have rushed that fourth one into production? I mean, it's all about money, right? I know we're fans and we have this bias that we go, oh, well, it's creatively wonderful and it's not about money, it's about the art. Well, we're just bullshitting ourselves, are we not? Are we not lying to the fact that it is about profit? And because those films were, I know it's insane to think, not profitable for Paramount, then why invest the money? And so we didn't get a number 4. It also highlights one of the massive problems we've had since 2009 Star Trek. And that's over expenditure on these films, which bled in to the era of New Trek. Because the problems they had with money and the fact that, the Kelvin films were not financially really viable or successful for them, hence why we didn't get a 4, hence why they're deciding to reboot Star Trek. That happened in the streaming world as well. Some of you may think, well, now hang on, they're successful as fuck. Like, we've had a ton of shows now, and some people really love them and all that. Doesn't mean they're making money, and they're not. Because if they were, none of what you're hearing out there would be true. Because at the end of the day, what your ideological perspective on any of that new Trek shows is, none of that shit matters if it makes money. None of that matters. Holy shit, we got how many Transformers films from Michael Bay, with each one being more ass than the previous one? But they kept making them, right? They were pumping that shit out. Why? Because they made money. They made money. It's all about the money. And so Secret Hideout, which is Kurtzman's production company, which has pretty well been in charge of this new Trek era, decided to bring the Kelvin timeline aesthetics onto the small screen. All right, that's the idea. Let's bring the cinematic experience into the streaming world, which costs money. That shit ain't cheap. And so production costs were triple what they used to be back in the days of Enterprise or Voyage or Deep Space Nine. Even more so. Because, as they say in the new Trek world, to all the directors, you shoot to thrill the audience. I mean, I think that says more about also the approach, the misguided approach to creating Star Trek, but that's for another video. But in the reality is, when you have a franchise on the scale and the size and the importance of Star Trek, when you've just bought Paramount and you go in and you're looking at the books, at your profit and loss margins to one of the greatest franchises out there, how are the accountants going, what the fuck is this? How in the absolute fuck are we not printing money hand over fist? Everybody loves Star Trek. Star Trek is one of those rare franchises that crossed its fandom boundary. And what I mean by that, every show has diehard fans, right? The group that will be loyal to no end, will love it, will turn up for every time there's new content. Every franchise has that. Star Trek especially. But the thing about Star Trek, it broke that circle and bled into the community. And even Grandma and Grandpa love Star Trek. Little Billy loves Star Trek. Everybody loves Star Trek. JJ, absolutely exposed that nerve with Star Trek 2009, which, hit all the demographics in the right spot. And hence, that is probably the one that was the most profitable and was the most well-loved. But again, still really didn't make any money because these things cost too much. They cost too much. In the 1980s, they pumped out Star Trek films every couple of years, right? I think there was a 3-year break between 4 and 5. I think might have been a 3-year break. However, they came out regularly and were always profitable in Paramount in the 1980s. Why? Because they kept the budget. They kept the budgets at a reasonable mid-level budget size, which mitigated risk as much as they could, but they were able to mitigate risk. So a Star Trek 3 perhaps could be profitable, still makes money for Paramount, right? And then you can get a massive hit like out of nowhere, The Voyage Home, which is one of those films, again, crossed the community boundaries. Everybody went and saw that in the summer of 1986. Super profitable, so that's great. So when you come to 5, which is not profitable, not a huge deal. It's not a massive concern of Paramount because, Star Trek 4 did amazing money for it. So, You win some, you lose some. They're kind of cool with it. Enough that they don't stop the franchise there. No, we get number 6 down the pipeline. And not for financial reasons, really. Essentially, that movie is made to protect the franchise. That's what Paramount wanted to do. They were looking at doing Starfleet Academy back then. But they were always not going to give up on their money-making machine because it was a money-making machine. And unfortunately, in this modern era of Star Trek, and why I think it's in trouble and needs to be rebooted again, is down to the core issue of money. It shouldn't cost this much, and especially on television. What the fuck are they thinking? So they rob us of a lot of content because fans like myself, we're used to 24 episode, 25, 26 episode seasons. And we love them. Right? And we know the filler episodes. We know they were running out of money in episode 19. Well, that's why everything took place in a hallway or the bridge. You know, that's fine. That was good. But the budgets were reasonable. They were reasonable, which means the risk is lower, right? So I'd heard a figure, and I could be wrong. I haven't done my research on this recently to confirm this, but I believe something like Strange New Worlds costs $8 million an episode. That means it's $80 million a year to make Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Now, I'm not even going to get into what I thought of season 3. You know, a lot of that I said over in the Captain's Quadrant. You know, and I'm sure I'll bring it back up again in this show at some point. But I don't care if it was the greatest season or the worst season. No show at this point in a streaming marketplace should be costing you $80 million for 10 episodes. I mean, we would scream all the time, and Jason Roy Gaston, co-host over on his channel and many things we do together, who I completely trust and mostly agree with on Star Trek. Even he agrees about that. It's an issue. Well, I think we all could universally agree, and I'd love to hear a counter argument from anyone who could come up with one, of why we couldn't halve that budget and double the episodes. Which means each episode, you know, we get 20 episodes a year with an overall budget of $40 million, meaning it's still $2 million an episode. It doesn't all have to look like it's at the movies. Right? It doesn't have to look cinematic every time. We can bring it down a little bit, you know? And the advantage of that, I think, from story-wise, is you have to come up with 20 stories a year. Got to start getting inventive. And because you have a budget, you can't CGI your way out of anything. I mean, you can do some stuff, but still, an overhaul needs to happen. Star Trek isn't working at the moment for some people. And it comes down to money. I mean, it also comes down to some storytelling and the writer's room and the showrunner, which, trust me, I am going to get into in this series. But yeah, that's what I wanted this to chat to you today about, to rant about, is the money issue with Star Trek. Something needs to be done. The Kelvin universe, although I enjoyed 2 movies very much, and they looked fantastic. They did, to a point. I still think I'm not a big fan of shiny floors, but I will get into that another time. And there's a good reason why I'm not a big fan of shiny floors, but I mean literally not floors in FLAWS, but FLOORS. Floors. Don't like shiny mirrored floors in Star Trek. Not good. Get into that later. But yeah, no, things in all seriousness, Money has just become a curse to the franchise and has cost it. I think getting a fourth or fifth Kelvin Timeline movie, because I over budgeted those movies. And I think it's also part of the reason why now Paramount is shutting the door to Alex Kurtzman and his production company and saying, I'm sorry, but we're not long going to be in business with you. Things cost too much. Anyway, that's the first episode of Old Man Yelling at Star Trek. Feel free to have your comments. I would be disappointed if you didn't have your feedback. But whether you like what I'm saying or you disagree with what I'm saying or you have counterpoints, whatever the fuck your opinion is, it's a valid opinion. We all have our opinions. But I think we can all universally say it does come from a place of love. So, guys, that's been Old Man Yelling at Star Trek, and I'm indeed that old man.